Faye.
Are you ready for the truth? Bring it on!
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Do you want the whole truth? I don't think you're ready.
Governments don't control things. A government can't control the economy without controlling people.
It's Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth.
Well, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. We're really glad you're here, right here on the, say it with me now, AFR Talk Network. So thankful and grateful to each and every one of you who prayed, participated in some way, called in, pledged, share-a-thon. Thank you. Want to keep getting that message out. We are incredibly thankful. All right. Now, we've got a big show tonight. A really big show. So just sit back. If you're in your car, just know that you don't have to touch that dial. And you never have to. You just lock it in to AFR. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. The big lie. Are you going to start with that, Crane? I'm not. I am, but I'm not. Here's what I'm going to do. What is the big lie that was exposed by NBC News for 21 seconds last night, according to MRC, Media Research Center Newsbusters? Well, it's this. Roll it.
We will keep this promise to the American people. If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor, period.
If you like your doctor, you keep your doctor. If you like your current insurance, you keep that insurance.
If you've got health insurance, you like your doctor, you like your plan, you can keep your doctor, you can keep your plan. Nobody is talking about taking that away from you. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan.
Okay, was not true, and to knowingly mislead somebody is to lie. He lied. We'll break down that lie and the impact of it and why it matters to each and every one of us in America. Paul Howard, Manhattan Institute Senior Fellow and Director of the Manhattan Institute Center for Medical Progress, will be with us on the flip side of this segment. But first, speaking of lying, you remember Iraq? Well, of course, Crane. We had that surge, and you know that didn't work. Actually, it did. Well, President Obama's foreign policy got in there, and he really made things work out. He took what Bush gave him, which was lemons, and he made lemonade. Exact opposite. Do you remember what was said about Iraq? Oh, yeah, Bush lied. People died. Crane, are you really going back? It's Tuesday. Why are you going back to this? I mean, why do you have to bring this up? It matters. Just as Benghazi matters, just as the IRS scandal matters. This matters because if we are making a decision based on a false premise, we are going to be flawed in analyzing the challenge or the problem that we want to solve, and the policy will be off. Certainly. We've got to get the truth, right? You want the truth? But Bush lied, people died. No, actually not true. Senate bipartisan panel, Intel committee said, hey, look, didn't lie, didn't pressure anybody, because the very people that were accusing President Bush of lying about Iraq were making the very same statements he did based on the same intelligence. Wow, really? Yeah, it's true. Go back, check it out. They actually voted for it. That's why they put our national security on the altar of politics. Yeah, that's what they did. So, strong charge. I bring it up a lot because it is something that we are still engaged in. What's that? The war on Islamofascism, the war on terror, the global war on terror, as it's been called. Whether we like it or not, we're still in it. But getting back to Iraq, Dick Cheney, former vice president, big time, was on last night, The Factor, with Bill O'Reilly, and Bill O'Reilly took him to task and said, hey, what did we gain out of Iraq? The vice president answered, roll it.
What
did we get out of Iraq for all that blood and treasure? What did we get out of it?
What we gained, and my concern was then, and it remains today, is that the biggest threat we face is the possibility of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda equipped with weapons of mass destruction, with nukes, bugs, or gas. That was the threat after 9/11, and when we took down Saddam Hussein, we eliminated Iraq as a potential source of that.
Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia is back.
That's right, but they wouldn't be if they'd followed our policies that we laid out for them when we left.
Okay.
But also, let me finish.
Sure.
In terms of what we got out of it, we took down Saddam as a major source. 5 days after we got Saddam, Muammar Gaddafi announced he was going to surrender his nuclear materials, and he had centrifuges, he had a weapons design, he had the uranium feedstock, and after we took care of that, we took down A.Q. Khan, who was his major supplier. The father of the Pakistan program, it was running a black market operation. We've put him out of business. We got rid of 3 major sources of potential
weapons of mass
proliferation of nuclear weapons. Very important.
Okay.
Pretty big. And a lot of people don't realize that when we were advancing, and we got Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi came out and said, "Hey, I have nuclear weapons. Come here. Come on in. I don't want to die." I know, he's dead now. Sure. My point is, there is a way to fight this war and get results. And the way is to target the regimes and look for ways to destabilize and have regime change. Crane, you want to invade everybody. No, I don't. Actually, but if you don't do anything, what happens is that becomes part of the choice that you have to make one way or another. And not really invasion, but military action becomes a greater possibility because you didn't take the steps going up to that. Like what, Crane? Well, in the case of Iran, which I'm going to read a report to you from Investors Business Daily, that they could have a bomb nuke in less than a month. Wow. Yeah, and we've always been off on our intelligence estimates, by the way, because intel is not exact. So what does that mean? Well, it means Israel is not taking their eye off the ball here and recognizes the threat. And either the president, well, I'll get to it in a second. I want to finish with Dick Cheney here. Dick Cheney addressing some policy disagreements with the host of The Factor, that would be Bill O'Reilly. And he was talking about policy disagreements between the Obama administration and Dick Cheney and the Bush administration and the consequences of failures of the Obama administration. Here was the vice president last night again. Roll it.
Issue of The Economist 2 or 3 weeks ago had a cover on it that said the new face of terrorism. And inside it showed a map of 10 different countries across North Africa, from Mali, Nigeria, all the way across, that are now safe havens or sanctuaries, if you will, places where terrorists, Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda fellow travelers can find safe harbor and sanctuary. Far bigger part of the globe now that's vulnerable to that kind of thing, training facilities and so forth, than we ever faced in the past. The U.S. withdrawal from that part of the world is significantly diminished our capacity, so that whether we're trying to deal with the situation in Syria or the situation in Iran, they don't pay any attention anymore.
Okay, so again, you have a policy difference with the Obama administration.
Big time.
Yeah, this is something that we really don't address because it's not an easy enemy to deal with. Islamofascism, as we know it. Terrorist organizations. Countries that are not necessarily stable in the first place and maybe don't share our values. But how do you deal with a threat of Islamo-terrorists in a nuclear age? Well, first and foremost, you identify the threat. And you recognize it's real, and you recognize that when we're dealing with this threat, we deal with it as a war as opposed to a criminal matter, because crime is reactive as opposed to proactive, and you're dealing with intelligence and a whole host of things and the rules of evidence. And yet we've gotten away because we've forgotten, not you, but so many have forgotten what happened on September 11th. And I ask one thing: what has changed in the sense of the threat? The threat is the same. These are the people that chop off heads. These are the people that desire the deaths of Americans and non-believers. And what have we done? Well, as a country, we've spoken things that are simply not true. Islam being a religion of peace. We've played politically correct games with identifying the enemy, and it's cost us lives. Fort Hood, just one of the examples. So what does all that mean? It means that Dick Cheney, former vice president who had a disagreement with President Bush on dealing with Iran that could be nuclear capable within a month and a half, according to a report. That report and that information was actually from somebody who criticized the Bush administration for their intel. And what he believed was rushing to war. His name is David Albright. I'll get to that in a second. I want to go now to the challenge that so many people face when it comes to our foreign policy. Why do we have to be the policemen of the world? Why do we have to make it our business what terrorists are doing? Do you want to establish democracies all around, Pax Americana? We want to be in democracy, nation building at the cost of lives, blood specifically, and treasure. We can't afford it. We can't do that. And yet, when we look at what we are facing, if we choose isolationism, the consequences are dire. And yet, they will only be felt after a terrible attack that will yield more death and destruction than what we saw on September 11th, when we're speaking of nuclear weapons, among other things. That said, we also face Israel being pushed into the sea and destroyed. So we go now to Vice President Dick Cheney answering that question on isolationism. Push the brake if we have to. Roll it.
Well, what do you get out of it if you withdraw and you let that happen again, Bill? We don't have the choice anymore, if we ever did, certainly since 9/11, of calling back behind our oceans and saying, well, what goes over there doesn't matter to us. It matters a hell of a lot if there are a lot of terrorist bases, and there are more areas where they can be based than ever before, and if there's major proliferation problem of nuclear weapons, and that also is increased.
But that puts the strain on our U.S. military is unbelievable.
Well,
and on our Treasury. 17 trillion in debt.
That's right. But if we had a presence over there, if we'd been able to continue the policies that we put in place, if we'd been able to work to keep governments, established governments that are stable, willing to defend their own sovereign turf, we'd be much better off than we are now. Now we're in a position where our adversaries no longer fear us and our allies no longer trust us.
Why is that? Well, a number of reasons, but it started with an apology tour. And it has continued with a president that has not been supportive of Israel. We've pushed Israel to release criminals, terrorists. We push them to negotiate with terrorists. We treat them as if they are on the same moral level as terrorists, as if it's a conflict and they just need to get together, rather than it's a right of, well, right and wrong. Nobody really wants to do that anymore because nobody wants to deal with what the consequences are of letting the terrorists, the Islamofascists, gain ground. We don't like that. We don't want to talk about war. We see the destruction. We see the death. We see the fact that when we were in Iraq and things started to go sideways, we see the fact that that human toll of our fellow Americans experiencing tragedy, because war is messy, war is Hades, war is awful. But the alternative to engaging, to stopping our enemy, is surrendering to our enemy, inevitably. And they are real. Now, the report I was speaking to, renowned physicist David Albright, not a neocon hawk, according to the Investor's Business Daily. A decade ago, in a run-up to the Iraq War, he accused President George W. Bush's administration of misleading journalists with questionable evidence of the Iraqi uranium enrichment for the sake of, quote, a short-term political goal to convince people that Saddam Hussein is close to acquiring nuclear weapons. Now, bottom line, it was true. Joe Wilson was wrong, but I'll get to that. That doesn't matter. I just want you to know this wasn't from somebody who was a supporter of the war. But last week, his Institute for Science and International Security estimated that Iran would have produced enough uranium to build a nuclear weapon in a month or so. This comes as President Obama tries to persuade the Senate not to intensify economic sanctions as he seeks a summit with the smiling moderate cleric Rouhani, recently elected as president. Think about this. Now, we can go back and look at the analogies to World War II, peace in our time. We have. This is a major story. It should be dealt with day in and day out. We're talking about the survival of Israel as well as the United States. And there's going to be a consequence for ignoring this. I pray that it is not one that yields a butcher's bill. We talk about lies, we talk about trust, we talk about our government's job. Our government's job is to protect us, secure the borders. Commander-in-Chief of the United States, President Obama, that is his job, to protect the American people. And as we see, he is failing. Crane Durham's nothing but truth. We're going to go to break, and on the flip side of the break, anatomy of a lie of the Obama administration when it comes to being able to keep your insurance. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, because when we talk to Paul Howard of the Manhattan Institute, we're going to ask him what we're going to hear from Kathleen Sebelius, HHS Secretary, Health and Human Services Secretary. That's right. She's at the foundation of what we see in Obamacare and the failings. She's testifying tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern. What can we expect? We will ask Mr. Howard those questions and much more. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, proudly on. Say it with me now. AFR Talk.